Today we have questions about the end times, all right? The end times. Now this person asked, how do the three views on millennialism affect how people think and how they behave now? I repeat, how do the three views on millennialism affect how people think and how they behave now? All right, the three views of millennialism. I'll probably need to draw some things. It is always an important thing for the Christian to realize that theology are not just doctrines for head knowledge. Some people feel that, well, we have different doctrines, we have different theologies. Well, what difference does it make? Now, this person is wise to understand that what views you hold about doctrines, certain doctrines, even eschatology, will affect how you live. Doctrines are meant, theology are meant to change the way we live. All right? So, this is an important question. We are Bible-Presbyterians. We believe in premillennialism, and not only simply because we see it in the Bible, but we know that it is a truth, and therefore it governs our choices. All right, so let's begin. Now, first, let's begin with post-millennialism. What is post-millennialism? Right, we have the church age. We have Christ coming and death and resurrection. Now, we know that the Bible talks about a period called the Millennium, and that is 1,000 years, all right, 1,000 years, 1,000 years. So, what is post-mill? Now, whenever we talk about mill, pre, post, and so on, we are referring to the return of Christ, when Christ returns. So, post-millennialism is about Christ returning at the end of the 1,000 years, right? Post-millennialism. I just want to make sure that I read some definitions so that you're very clear. Now, this view is post-millennialist view, an optimistic view of the world. Now, one of the ideas about this view is the world will get better and better. Well, obviously, because when Scripture describes the millennium, it is a wonderful time, all right? So the idea is, because we are here till Christ returns, then before Christ returns, the world gets better and better. Millennialism. It is an optimistic view of the world until it reaches perfection, all right? So it just gets better and better, until almost perfection, and then Christ returns. Now, how does it affect our living? The idea of this, therefore, maybe I ask, maybe Matthew, if someone believes in Christ returning here, and then the world must get better and better, what do you think? How do you think it will affect what Christians do? What will Christians feel they need to do? So, if you want Christ to come back, what must you do? Make it better, right? Make it better and better. So, in order for Christ to return, it is incumbent upon Christians on earth to make the world better and better. So, they believe that the world will become better and better until it reaches perfection through human effort. Through human effort. The world will eventually be peaceful, harmonious, and prosperous. Now, after the world has experienced these wonderful conditions of peace, harmony, and prosperity, then Jesus will return. So if the Christian wants Christ to return, well, the harder we work to make the world a better place, then we will finally have Christ returning. Now, with that, in fact, this view is often held by modernists and liberals, and they deny the doctrine of sin. They deny the doctrine of sin. They deny that Well, they say that when scriptures talk about all these things, it's just talking about, good versus evil, and make the world a better place, and that is all right? It's not about sin and man gets judged, and then men will live in sin and God will come and judge the world and all that. It is not about all these things. So this is especially held, post-mill is especially held by modernists who deny the idea of sin. Now then there is the modernists, right? Then the people that hold on to this is also the reconstructionists, all right? They want to reconstruct society to make it a better place, all right? So we also have the reconstructionists. They are also often called the theonomists, right? Theonomist. The economists, and the theonomist. Now, with that, what do you think? How do you think it will affect the Christian behavior? How do you think it will affect the Christian behavior? Maybe I try Julius, right? We must make society, because millennium is a time when the whole society, not just Christendom, but the whole society is wonderful, right? Where good triumphs over evil. Is not like today, where evil is more prevalent than good. At that time, the whole society will be wonderful. What do you think, Julius, the people, especially the Christians, must focus on? They will try to be more holy. Do you think holiness is what they will be more worried about? There will be something that will be more concerned about. Maybe ask Gracia. Very good, all right? Because they say that society will become very wonderful, right? So they will focus on fixing social issues. Now, if you read the Bible during this time, the rulers will be very righteous, and then evil will be immediately punished. So the whole idea of society is very wonderful, not like today. So social issues will be what they focus on. Now then, what would they do? How will it affect the Christians' behavior today? Well, maybe give an example. How do you think? Maybe Veronica. What do you think they will focus on if they want to fix social issues? Veronica, sorry. Say again, sorry? Oh, sorry, you have a sore throat. Maybe I ask the sister, Jennifer. Sore throat also? No, okay. Say. Louder? For example, health, is it? Oh, help the poor. All right, so helping the poor. So is it about, holiness and sharing the gospel and all? Well, maybe. But the main idea is because social issues, part of social issues are, there are lots of poor people, inequality in wealth distribution. So we must fix all these kind of social problems. Now, what else will Christians focus on? Let's try another one. Caleb. Inequalities, all right? Inequalities between men and women, right? So whether the Bible says there are different roles, doesn't matter. This inequality, society says unequal, then we must fix it. Now, what about wars, all right? Wars and all that. So social injustices, war, and so on. What about education, all right? Education. So it becomes very political as well, all right? Politics, because politics affect all these areas. So the Christian, how does this view affect Christians? Christians become more and more engrossed in social issues. And of course, which gospel will be the most prevalent that will support that? The social gospel, right? Can we say that, when Christ comes, when Christ returns and the millennium, all this, we don't need to argue about that. We don't have to study to make very sure it is the correct or the wrong view. No, it affects Christianity drastically. So now the other thing is this. The whole idea is through human effort. Man can make society better through human effort. The thinking will change. So someone said, well, share the gospel. Maybe ask another person. Maybe, let me see who. Isaac. Now, do you think by human effort we can solve social issues to the point where it is like the millennium? Judges are honest, majority people are righteous, minority will be evil. No, through human effort we can't. Why? Very good. Because of the issue of sin. Sin. Why are there social problems? Do you think it's just a human thing, that's all? No, in the human, because of sin in the human, man will behave unrighteously, wickedly, all right? No amount of human effort is going to change the heart. You can put a lot of efforts in all these kind of things. You are not going to bring about the world to look like the millennium. You can never do that, because the only way to solve social problems is solve the problem of sin. When people turn to Christ, when they get saved, they will stop being unrighteous. They will control themselves, right? So this whole idea now becomes man can make the world a better place. So they do not look forward to help from God, right? They just focus, all this about is social issues. What sin are you talking about? So you understand why the modernists would subscribe to this view, right? So to answer this person's question, the whole problem is man will now begin to focus on the false gospel, and many will not be saved. We will live in disobedience. Now the next question is, now why do we reject this view? Why do we reject this view? Let us turn to Matthew chapter 24. Let's read from verses 4 to 8. 4 to 8 reading, Matthew 24, 4 to 8 reading. And Jesus answered and said unto them, Take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes and in diverse places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Now, what is Christ's description of the times, the end times before he returns? Is it getting better and better? No, very clearly. Wars, injustices, wickedness of men. Now, because of famines and pestilences, you can't solve those things. Those are sent by God. Poverty and all this will increase. So it is a very opposite picture to what Christ paints. Right? You don't have to turn there, but we studied this in great detail, 2 Timothy chapter 3, where we study all the behaviors of men. Men gets more and more wicked. Even the Christians will struggle against all these things. So the Bible makes it very clear that things will get worse. Right? Things will get worse, not get better before Christ returns. So that is one among many other reasons, which I'm sure you're familiar with, why we reject this view. Now then we go to the next view, all right? And that is millennialism, all right? Millennialism, so it's basically a period, right? Millennium is basically a period. It is not a literal 1,000 years. That's why it's called don't have, right? Amil, absent. Amil. Millennialists teach that there is no future 1,000 years. Literal 1,000 years. It is now. The 1,000 years in Revelation 20 is not literal but symbolic. All right? So to them is a symbolic millennium. A symbolic millennium. I'm sure you already know that. And they say that reign of Christ is not an earthly but an heavenly one. So there's no literal 1,000 years where Christ will sit on earth on his throne and reign from earth, on earth. So they say, no such thing. Okay, Christ currently rules like he rules the millennium. Now, so with this, so they read everything as symbolic. Right? Literal verses are read as symbolic. Now, how do you think it affects the believer's view? How do you think it affects the believer's view? Want to try? This one might be a bit difficult. Cornelius. So everything is just symbolic. Okay, maybe I ask the dads, right? Okay, Howard. Good things to do. They may not. That is very much the modernist, just good things. But once you start to read things as symbolic, what's going to happen in your interpretation of things and so on? Ask the uni student, Justin. You read more and more of literal events as symbolic. Then you become more and more allegorical. All right? More and more allegorical in your interpretation of scriptures and so on. Now, when you're allegorical, it becomes very dangerous. Because now you decide and you make up your mind. You make up what God is really saying, but God is not saying that. It leads to all kinds of wrong living as well. So allegorical is one of the problems. How does it affect them? When things are so clear, it's literal, and they read it as symbolic, they grow to become more and more allegorical. Okay? So that's one of how it begins to affect the Christians. Now, when it becomes allegorical, you can easily fall into the charismatic thinking. You read something, I think God says this. You can interpret it any way you want. God spoke to me that this is what it is. Right? You become more and more existential, then it becomes dangerous. Then you base your practices on what you see scriptures are saying. There's no, the authority of scriptures becomes questionable. Right? So these are the things that can happen to the Christian. Now, what else can happen? False peace. False peace. False peace. Because this is a period. Now we are already living in the millennium. So there's this sense of false peace. There are all these things happening. These are times of peace. Millennium is a time of supreme peace, correct? Next to the eternal new heaven and earth. It is great peace. So there's this false sense of peace. A lot of battles that we need to do becomes ignored. No, this is a time of peace. So some of these things can happen to the believer's thinking. Now, why do we reject this view? Maybe I ask. Phoebe, why do we reject our meal? We are pre-meal, right, as a Presbyterian. Why do we reject this? Can you think of any? No? Thomas, ask the dad. Thomas. Okay. Why do we reject this view of our millennialism, our meal? Why do we reject it?
That is hard for you to explain some of the scriptures where Christ said he will rule for literal 1,000 years.
All right, so there are many literal verses in Revelation which talks about Christ ruling on earth and talks about days and so on. Now, what about 1 Peter? Let's turn to 1 Peter. So we should know why we reject this view as Bible-Presbyterians, because Presbyterians tend to hold to this view, right? Now let's read verse 8 together. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. Chapter 5, verse 8, reading. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. Now here, Peter makes it very clear in the present tense that Satan is walking about, seeking whom he may devour. So Satan is walking about this earth now, seeking to do that. Maybe I ask now, this should give you a very big hint already. Yufei. So if God says that Satan is walking around as a roaring lion, which we studied on Friday night, right? To devour Christians. Now, can you think of why, then therefore, this cannot be the millennium? Say again? That Satan is still a lion. He's what? He isn't. Why would not Satan be a lion? Okay, ask another one. Maybe some uni student. Uni students. Don't ask uni students. Ask Isaac again. Very good. Now, let's turn to Revelations. Chapter 20. Revelation chapter 20. Now look at verse 4. Verse 4 is very clear, right? Verse 4 is very clear. And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. Right? And then it says, but the rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years. Right? So then verse 7, and when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed. Satan shall be loosed. It means that during the millennium, during the 1,000 years, Satan was bound up. And how do we know that? Chapter 20, verse 3. Chapter 20, verse 3. Now, before the millennium begins, which we read just now, God says that Satan will be shut up into the bottom, cast into the bottomless pit, in verse 3, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. So during these 1,000 years, God makes it very clear, Satan is bound up. If Satan is bound up during this millennium, Satan should be bound up. All right, Satan bound up. But yet, Scripture says, now, Peter wrote to the Christians then, now, right? Satan is walking about. So is he bound up or walking about? Now this tells us very simply, besides many other verses, that Amil, that this is millennium, cannot be true because Satan is troubling us all the time. Okay? So we have to understand why we reject this view. I emphasize this again. We are Presbyterians, but we are Bible Presbyterians. Presbyterians tend to hold to this view, although increasingly more and more are moving to the pre-mill view, right? The pre-mill view. So these are some reasons. Then, of course, we have the pre-mill view. That is what we hold on to. We are the church. Hey, actually, just now I drew everything wrongly, right? Why no one corrected me? Actually, in a sense, it's Christ came, then began the church age. Right? In that sense, this way. Okay, so now pre-mill. We are in the church age. No, before that. Now, another problem with this is they will reject a particular thing. What would they reject? Let's try Maggie. The millennialists, all right, the Presbyterians typically, they reject a certain thing about a nation. What is that? Not sure. No more students. So few. Okay, Justin again. Justin. Israel. They reject that Israel is permanently, they reject that Israel will one day be restored, right? be restored. The church is temporarily taking Israel's place, but God will restore Israel. Right? Again, those verses, they will have to reject it. They have to allegorize it as well. So the rejection of God's covenant with Israel is very strange, that I always wonder. I mean, Presbyterian is the covenantal faith, but the most important covenant with Israel, they reject that. Okay, so that's another thing that will change the way they think. Now, what about pre-meal? Pre-meal means this is the millennium, right? Before the millennium, we know there is the tribulation period, and this is the millennium. Pre-meal, when is Christ coming back? Remember, millennialism is about when Christ coming back. Pre-meal means Christ comes pre the millennium start. Means at the end of the tribulation period, at the beginning of the millennium, pre-meal, Christ returns. Of course, there are some that are mid-trib. They believe Christ returns in the middle of tribulation, but it's still before the millennium, right? Pre-meal, we believe in this. Now, how do you think this affect our view? How do you think it would affect our view? No more. Maybe Susan. How do you think pre-meal affects the Christian's living? Very good. The focus on living for Christ. Living for Christ now. Christ promised that I will return, right? It's not I'm already here, but we are constantly reminded to look forward to that and to prepare for that. So the focus will be Christ has not returned, Christ will return, and he warned us to be prepared as a thief in the night. Right? So it motivates us, drives us to live with that carefulness. Okay? So Christ is not here already. That's what he's here already, then what preparation do we need to make? All right? So some of the changes. Of course, people accuse us and say, well, if you believe in this, then, well, you won't be motivated because, we will escape. We will escape a lot of things. Actually, we believe in pre-trib, all right? Before the tribulation. Right? Pre-trib. That is what, well, at least I believe in. Before millennium, but pre-trib. So before the tribulation, or do Christians enter 3.5 years? Some believe that. Reverend Timothy Toh believes that. So we believe before the tribulation, before the millennium, this is when Christ returns. And because we are raptured, then they say, well, Christians, we think that we won't go through tribulation. Because the idea is, if you are a good Christian, then you get resurrected. As you get raptured. If you're not so good a Christian, you'll be left behind. All right? There's some ideas like that. But that anyway, that is not the doctrine. We do not believe in that. It's not about if you live better, then you escape tribulation and so on. But there's a looking forward to Christ's return. All right? Okay, so the different views and how it affects. The last question. Now, knowing this, I hope that all of us truly live with eternal values in view and look forward to Christ's coming. Now then, there is a related question, a short one. Now, will the third heaven, how timely, we studied about third heaven today as well. Will the third heaven be gone as well after the millennium? So this is the millennium, after the millennium. All right, this goes into infinity. Will the third heaven be gone? Matthew, Julius, what's the third heaven? Who stays? Where's the third heaven? Where God stays. What's the first heaven? Our atmosphere. Second heaven? Space. Third heaven, the Bible talks about, we saw in this morning's BBK, paradise, where God is. The third heaven. Apostle Paul was caught up in the third heaven. Then he describes God, revealing him the things, right, in the third heaven. So it's about heaven where God dwells. So the person asks, will the third heaven be gone after the millennium? What do you think? Let me ask. Elim, I see your parents. Elim, what do you think the third heaven will be gone? All right, it will be destroyed. The third heaven will be destroyed, just like because there will be a new heaven and a new earth. Now, how do we know that? Let's turn to Revelations chapter 21. Revelation chapter 21. Now, chapter 20 is about, the millennium. At the end of the millennium, the great white throne judgment. So look up here. So chapter 20 is about the millennium here, and at the end of the millennium, the great white throne judgment here. All right, at the end of the millennium, that's the end of chapter 20. Now, what happens after the great white throne judgment and the millennium ending? Let's read chapter 21, verse 1, reading. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. So here it tells us that there is a new heaven and a new earth. Now the first heaven here is obviously not talking about first, second, third heaven, but when God first created heaven, when God first created the three heavens, that is what it means. The first time God created, He created these first three heavens. All right? So it says in chapter 21, verse 1, I saw a new heaven to replace that first heaven which God created. All right? The first, second, third heaven, that first heaven that God created. So from here we know that the third heaven, as we know today, will no longer be. Now, question is why? Well, God wants to create everything new, right? That's one thing. Job says that even the heavens are not clean in your sight, right? Now, what is the idea? Firstly, it's the idea of God is so holy, so pure, the comparison. But something that, Satan fell in heaven, right? So even heaven is stained. Job is not saying, heaven is a place with sin, right? Even the heavens are unclean. He's not saying Satan, the heaven there continues to be angels sinning in heaven, that's why it's not clean. So some people would extrapolate, why must God create a new heaven? Why must God create a new earth? The new earth is so stained. Okay. Renovation is no use. Before millennium, there will be a renovation of the face of the earth. It's no use. Men will still continue to sin during the millennium. So total destruction, because after millennium, moving into eternity, there will be no sinners on earth or in heaven. Sinners will all be in hell, lake of fire, right? So that's why God will create a new earth. Not renovate, but create a new earth. Then likewise for heaven, where sin has occurred in the first place, God will also clean it up and make it a new heaven. Totally starting from scratch. So some people say that's the reason. God does not explicitly reveal the reasons, but I think it makes sense. But we know one thing for sure. To answer this person's question, that the third heaven, as it is the third heaven today, will be gone as well after the millennium. All right? Actually, why do you ask that? Pei, why do you ask that? Oh, okay. Sorry I answered it so late, so you couldn't answer. All right, so that is all. So please continue to submit your questions. Let us turn to God in prayer. What do we have here? Top 5 reasons why church dropouts. What church dropouts say, why they stop attending church. Now, please remember 66% of, I take the American view, they are the most readily available results. They stop attending church at least a year after turning 18. So from